Putin doesn't want negotiations. He and his team are pretending to make concessions, to want to talk about something, but in reality, they're just stalling for time. On the eve of a new round of negotiations in Geneva, where the discussion will also include territories, a major article on this topic was published in Bloomberg. And I think it's worth agreeing with it, because we really do see that negotiations are taking place. They were held in Abu Dhabi, they were held in Geneva. They're happening now in Geneva. They have taken place in different locations, with different delegations, but in fact there are no results. What does this tell us? It tells us that someone isn't planning to reach any agreement at all. It's obvious to anyone that Ukraine needs peace, Ukraine needs to develop, Ukraine needs to restore its economy, rebuild its infrastructure and its energy sector. The West is also in a way pushing for this. At least the US is pressuring us to move towards some kind of peace process. But Russia is categorically refusing. They aren't outright refusing. They're afraid of pressure from Trump, but they pretend to be entering negotiations, while in reality not agreeing to anything at all. That's true, and the journalists are absolutely right here. The only correct tactic for the West is to steadily increase the pressure on Russia, on the Kremlin, and on their entire national economy as well. First and foremost, of course, they are appealing to the United States to strengthen sanctions. But they also mention Europe, which uses petroleum products made from Russian oil, and that's fair as well. In fact, Bloomberg assesses that there is serious damage to the Russian economy, because after 4 years, they have not achieved any significant military results in Ukraine. Even without recalling the plans to capture all of Ukraine in a month, or to hold a parade in Kiev in 3 days, or in a week. In other words, the territorial gains are minor. The human losses are estimated at 1.2 million, which is a reasonable assessment. The economic losses are simply insane. There is a crisis there. I wrote about it today. And the company Samolet, the largest developer, their workers are no longer showing up for work because they aren't being paid. And in Tuva, bus drivers driven to desperation are even staging protests with signs. Pay our wages. For Russians to go out with protest signs, to take part in a protest action, it's frightening. It really takes a lot to push them to that point. In other words, the situation is really dire, but it needs to be pushed further. Ukraine, for its part, is of course imposing sanctions, very powerfully. There's the Ilsky oil refinery, and today the second terminal in the village of Volna, in the Temryuk district, there's a refinery there too. And yesterday in Volgograd and large chemical plants in the Perm region, they've managed to reach quite far. Bryansk region, Belgorod region, yesterday something flew over Moscow as well. There are detailed reports about where it landed yesterday, today and the day before with photos and videos. If you're interested, along with analysis, you can find it on my Telegram channel, Sazonov Official, or on Facebook, Kyrylo Pravda Rob. Feel free to use it and check it out. There's more news there. Here is just the essence and the conclusions. The war is costing Russia more and more, but there is no other way to make them stop. Well, we're not going to defeat Russia completely or reach the Urals. By the way, today is a holiday in China. New Year, the beginning of spring, they are celebrating. And the well-known press drunkard of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, recorded a video message in Chinese where she congratulated the Chinese people and suggested meeting in Moscow. I think in China they smiled and said, give it time. And Moscow will become the capital of one of the provinces of China. But that won't happen quickly. China is in no hurry. Let's set the humor aside. The more pressure is put on Russia with sanctions, not only Ukrainian strikes on enterprises, but also Western ones, against oil, against energy, against metals, against fertilizers, against everything. The stronger the pressure, the faster the regime will collapse. It will collapse. Those who believe that Russians can fight while hungry and endlessly endure hardships. No, that's an illusion. Of course, this isn't a democratic country where a 10% drop in income or 10% inflation, a rise in prices, leads to an immediate change of government. No. But water wears away stone. Let's remember how the Soviet Union fell, the unsuccessful war in Afghanistan, rising prices, empty store shelves, a minor economic crisis compared to what is starting and will happen in Russia now. By the end of spring, the beginning of summer, the Soviet Union crumbled. So the West's task is to put pressure on the economy. And we've already ensured an unsuccessful war for Russia with our own efforts. The main problem is that for Trump, a successful end to the war, as a direct result of his policy and foreign policy achievements, is something he absolutely needs, and he needs it sooner rather than later. In the fall, before the congressional elections, to show that he has achieved something on the world stage. Europe does not hide the fact that this war suits them. While Russia is bogged down in Ukraine, Russia is becoming weaker and weaker. In parentheses, let's add Ukraine as well, because they see Ukraine as a strong potential competitor. And no one is going to attack Europe. While Russia is fighting in Ukraine, they can modernize their army, have endless discussions about army modernization, and do whatever they want. There is no threat. Well, reality is what it is. Nevertheless, there is always a risk that Ukraine and Russia might suddenly make peace, and Russia will turn its attention to the Baltic countries. And many European politicians quite seriously say that if Russia attacks Estonia, Lithuania or Latvia right now, NATO will not go to war. And I, by the way, admit that this is possible. That's why this Europe is a bit tense, it scares them and makes them still impose sanctions. In my opinion, it's not enough, not fast enough, not active enough, but this is a job for our diplomacy. In general, we're putting the squeeze on their economy, because that's the most realistic scenario for ending the war on normal, fair terms. I think that results noticeable to the naked eye will appear by late spring or early summer, when everything there will really start to fall apart. And by autumn, things will be very grim for them. God willing, we're working on it. Friends, subscribe to Telegram and Facebook. The links are in the video description. Subscribe to this channel, there will be good news. I'll be sharing, everything will be here. Ukraine.